Chapter 8. It was a relief to him to find how smoothly he and Deborah dropped back into their old relations. It was good to get home those evenings, for in this new stage of its existence, with its family of two, the house appeared to have filled itself with a deep, reposeful feeling. Laura had gone out of its life. He glanced into her room one night, and it looked like a guest room now. The sight of it brought him a pang of regret. But the big ship which was bearing her swiftly away to Paris in June seemed bearing off Roger's uneasiness too. He could smile at his former fears, for Laura was safely married and wildly in love with her husband. Time, he thought, would take care of the rest. Occasionally he missed her here, her voice, high-pitched but musical, chatting and laughing at the phone, her bustle of dressing to go out, glimpses of her extravagances, of her smart suits and evening gowns, of all the joyous color and dash that she had given to his home. But these regrets soon died away. The old house shed them easily, as though glad to enter this long rest. For the story of his family, from Roger's point of view at least, was a long, uneven narrative, with prolonged periods of peace and again with events piling one on the other. And now there came one of those peaceful times, and Roger liked the quiet. The old routine was re-established: his dinner, his paper, his cigar, and then his book for the evening. Some good, old-fashioned novel, or some pleasant book of travel which he and Judith had read aloud when they were planning out their lives. They had meant to go abroad so often when the children had grown up, and he liked to read about it still. Life was so quiet over the sea. Things were so old and mellow there. He resumed, too, his horseback rides, and on the way home he would stop in for a visit with Edith and her baby. The wee boy grew funnier every day, with his sudden kicks and sneezes, his waving fists and mighty yawns, and Roger felt drawn to his daughter here, for in these grateful seasons of rest that followed the birth of each of her children, Edith loved to lie very still and make new plans for her small brood. Only once she spoke of Laura, and then it was to suggest to him that he gather together all the bills his daughter had doubtless left behind. "If you don't settle them," Edith said, "they'll go to her husband, and you wouldn't like that, would you?" Roger said he would see to it, and one evening after dinner he started in on Laura's bills. It was rather an appalling time. He looked into his bank account and found that Laura's wedding would take about all his surplus. But this did not dismay him much, for money matters never did. It simply meant more work in the office. The next day he rose early and was in his office by 9 o'clock. He had not been so prompt in months, and many of his employees came in late that morning. But nobody seemed very much perturbed, for Roger was an easy employer. Still, he sternly told himself, he had been letting things get altogether too slack. He had been neglecting his business again. The work had become so cut and dried there was nothing creative left to do. It had not been so in years gone by. Those years had fairly bristled with ideas and hopes and schemes, but even those old memories were no longer here to hearten him. They had all been swept away when Bruce had made him move out of his office in the dark, creaky edifice down close under Brooklyn Bridge and come up to this new building, this steel-ribbed caravanserai for all kinds of business ventures, this place of varnished woodwork, floods of daylight, concrete floors, this building fireproof throughout. That expressed it exactly, Roger thought. Nothing could take fire here, not even a man's imagination, even though he did not feel old. Now and then in the elevator, as some youngster with eager eyes pushed nervously against him, Roger would frown and wonder, "What are you so excited about?" But again the business was running down, and this time he must jerk it back before it got beyond him. He set himself doggedly to the task, calling in his assistants one by one, going through the work in those outer rooms, where at tables long rows of busy young girls with colored pencils, scissors, and paste were demolishing enormous piles of newspapers and magazines. And vaguely, little by little, he came to a realization of how, while he had slumbered, the life of the country had swept on. For as he studied the lists and the letters of his patrons, Roger felt confusedly that a new America was here. Clippings, clippings, clippings. Businessmen and business firms, gigantic corporations kept sending here for clippings, news of themselves or their rivals, keeping keen watch on each other's affairs for signs of strength or weakness. How savage was the fight these days! Here was news of mines and mills and factories all over the land, clippings sent each morning by special messengers downtown to reach the brokers' offices before the market opened. One broker wrote, "Please quote your terms for the following. From 9 to 2 o'clock each day, our messenger will call at your office every hour for clippings giving information of the companies named below." The long list appended carried Roger's fancy out all over the continent, and then came this injunction: "Remember that our messenger must leave your office every hour. In information of this kind, every minute counts." Clippings, clippings, clippings. As Roger turned over his morning mail, in spite of himself, he grew absorbed. What a change in the world of literature! What a host of names of scribblers, not authors, but just writers, not only men, but women, too, novelists and dramatists, poets and muckrakers all jumbled in together, each one of them straining for a place. And the actors and the actresses, the musicians and the lecturers, each with his press agent and avid for publicity, fame. And here were society women from New York and other cities, all eager for press notices of social affairs they had given or managed, charity work they had conducted, suffrage speeches they had made. Half the women in the land were fairly talking their heads off, it seemed. Some had been on his lists for years. They married and wanted to hear what was said in the papers about their weddings. They quarreled and got divorces, and still sent here for clippings. They died, and still their relatives wrote in for the funeral notices. And even death was commercialized. A maker of monuments wanted news of all people of large means dead or dangerously ill in the state of Pennsylvania. Here were demands for charity bodies, hospitals, and colleges from clergymen with an anxious eye on the Monday morning papers. And here was an anarchist millionaire. And here was an insane asylum wanting to see itself in print. With a grim smile on his heavy visage, Roger stared out of his window. Slowly the smile faded. A wistful look came on his face. Who will take my business when I'm gone? If his small son had only lived, with what new zest and vigor it might have been made to grow and expand. If only his son had been here by his side. Chapter 9. Deborah needed rest, he thought, for the bright, attractive face of his daughter was looking rather pale of late, and the birthmark on her forehead showed a faint, thin line of red. One night at dinner, watching her, he wondered what was on her mind. She had come in late, and though several times she had made an effort to keep up the conversation, her cheeks were almost colorless, and more than once in her deep-set eyes came a flash of pain that startled him. "Look here, what's the matter with you?" he asked. Deborah looked up quickly. "I'd rather not talk about it, Dad." "Very well," he answered, and with a slight hesitation. "But I think I know the trouble," he said, "and perhaps some other time, when you do feel like talking—" He stopped, for on her wide, sensitive lips he saw a twitch of amusement. "What do you think is the trouble?" she asked, and Roger looked at her squarely. "Loneliness," he said. "Why?" she asked him. "Well, there's Edith's baby, and Laura getting married." "I see, and so I'm lonely for a family of my own. But you're forgetting my school," she said. "Yes, yes, I know," he retorted, "but that's not at all the same. Interesting work, no doubt, but, well, it isn't personal." Oh, isn't it? She answered, and she drew a quivering breath. Rising from the table, she went into the living room, and there, a few moments later, he found her walking up and down. I think I will tell you now, she said. I'm afraid of being alone tonight, of keeping this matter to myself. He looked at her apprehensively. Very well, my dear, he said. This is the trouble, she began. Down in my school, we've a family of about 3,000 children. A few I get to know so well I try to follow them when they leave, and one of these, an Italian boy, his name is Joe Bellini, was one of the best I ever had and one of the most appealing. But Joe took to drinking and got in with a gang of boys who blackmailed small shopkeepers. He used to come to me at times in occasional moods of repentance. He was a splendid physical type, and he'd been a leader in our athletics, so I took him back into the school to manage our teams in basketball. He left the gang and stopped drinking, and we had long talks together about his great ambition. He wanted to enter the fire department as soon as he was 21, and I promised to use my influence. She stopped, still frowning slightly. What happened? Roger asked her. His girl took up with another man, and Joe has hot Italian blood. He got drunk one night and shot them both. There was another silence. I did what I could, she said harshly, but he had had a bad record before him, and the young assistant district attorney had his own record to think of, too, so Joe got a death sentence. We appealed the case, but it did no good. He was sent up the river and is in the death house now, and he sent for me to come today. His letter hinted he was scared. He wrote that his priest was no good to him. So I went up this afternoon. Joe goes to the chair tomorrow at 6. Deborah went to the sofa and sat down inertly. Roger remained motionless, and a dull chill crept over him. So you see, my work is personal, he heard her mutter presently. All at once she seemed so far away, such a stranger to him in this life of hers. By George, it's horrible, he said. I'm sorry you went to see the boy. I'm glad, was his daughter's quick retort. I've been getting much too sure of myself. Of my school, I mean, and what it can do. I needed this to bring me back to the kind of world we live in. What do you mean? He roughly asked. I mean, there are schools and prisons, and gallows and electric chairs, and I'm for schools. They've tried their jails and gallows for whole black hideous centuries. What good have they done? If they'd given Joe back to the school and me, I'd have had him a fireman in a year. I know, because I studied him hard. He'd have grown fighting fires. He would have saved lives. Again she stopped with a catch of her breath. In suspense, he watched her angry struggle to regain control of herself. She sat bolt upright, rigid. Her birthmark showed a fiery red. In a few moments he saw her relax. But of course, she added wearily, it's much more complex than that. A school is nothing nowadays, just by itself alone, I mean. It's only a part of a city's life, which for most tenement children is either very dull and hard, or cheap and false and overexciting. And behind all that lie the reasons for that, and there are so many reasons. She stared straight past her father as though at something far away. Then she seemed to recall herself. But I'm talking too much of my family. Roger carefully lit a cigar. I don't think you are, my dear. I'd like to hear more about it. She smiled. To keep my mind off Joe, you mean? And mine, too, he answered. They had a long talk that evening about her hope of making her school what Roger visaged confusedly as a kind of mammoth home, the center of a neighborhood, of one prodigious family. At times, when the clock on the mantel struck the hour loud and clear, there would fall a sudden silence, as both thought of what was to happen at dawn. But quickly Roger would question again, and Deborah would talk steadily on. It was after midnight when she stopped. You've been good to me tonight, dearie, she said. Let's go to bed now, shall we? Very well, he answered. He looked at his daughter anxiously. She no longer seemed to him mature. He could feel what heavy discouragements, what problems she was facing in the dark, mysterious tenement world which she had chosen to make her own. And compared to these, she seemed a mere girl, a child groping its way, just making a start. And so he added wistfully, I wish I could be of more help to you. She looked up at him for a moment. Do you know why you were such a help? She said. It's because you have never grown old, because you've never allowed yourself to grow absolutely certain about anything in life. A smile, half sad and half perplexed, came on her father's heavy face. You consider that a strong point? He asked. I do, she replied, compared to being a bundle of creeds and prejudices. Oh, I've got prejudices enough. Yes, she said, and so have I, but we're not even sure of them these days. The world has a habit of crowding in, her father muttered vaguely. Roger did not sleep that night. He could not keep his thoughts away from what was going to happen at dawn. Yes, the city was crowding in upon this quiet house of his. Dimly he could recollect, in the genial years of long ago, just glancing casually now and then at some small and unobtrusive notice in his evening paper, execution at Sing Sing. It had been so remote to him, but here it was smashing into his house, through the life his own daughter was leading day and night among the poor. Each time he thought of that lad in a cell, again a chill crept over him. But savagely he shook it off, and by a strong effort of his will he turned his thoughts to the things she had told him about her school. Yes, in her main idea she was right. He had no use for wild reforms, but here was something solid, a good education for every child. More than once, while she had talked, something very deep in Roger had leapt up in swift response. For Deborah, too, was a part of himself. He, too, had had his feelings of humanity in the large. For years he had run a boys' club at a little mission school in which his wife had been interested, and on Christmas Eve he had formed the habit of gathering up a dozen small urchins right off the street and taking them round and fitting them out with good, warm winter clothing, after which he had gone home to help Judith trim the Christmas tree and fill their children's stockings. And later, when she had gone to bed, invariably he had taken the Christmas Carol from its shelf and had settled down with a glow of almost luxurious brotherhood. There was sentiment in Roger Gale, and as he read of Tiny Tim, his deep-set eyes would glisten with tears. And now here was Deborah, fulfilling a part of him in herself. You will live on in our children's lives. But this was going much too far. She was letting herself be swallowed up completely by this work of hers. It was all very well for the past 10 years, but she was getting on in age. High time to marry and settle down. Again, angrily, he shook off the thought of that boy Joe alone in a cell, eyes fixed in animal terror upon the steel door which would open so soon. The day was slowly breaking. It was the early part of June. How fresh and lovely it must be up there in the big mountains with Edith's happy little lads. Here it was raw and garish, weird. Some sparrows began quarreling just outside his window. Roger rose and walked the room. Restlessly he went into the hall. The old house appeared so strange in this light, as though stripped bare. There was something gone. Softly he came to Deborah's door. It was wide open, for the night had been warm, and she lay awake upon her bed with her gaze fixed on the ceiling. She turned her head and saw him there. He came in and sat down by her window. For a long time neither made a sound. Then the great clock on the distant tower, which had been silent through the night, resumed its deep and measured boom. It struck 6 times. There was silence again. More and more taut grew his muscles, and suddenly it felt to him as though Deborah's fierce agony were pounding into his very soul. The slow, slow minutes throbbed away. At last he rose and left her. There was a cold sweat on his brow. I'll go down and make her some coffee, he thought. Down in the kitchen, it was a relief to bang about hunting for the utensils. On picnics up in the mountains, his coffee had been famous. He made some now and boiled some eggs, and they breakfasted in Deborah's room. She seemed almost herself again. Later, while he was dressing, he saw her in the doorway. She was looking at her father with bright and grateful, affectionate eyes. "Will you come to school with me today? I'd like you to see it," Deborah said. "Very well," he answered gruffly. Chapter 10. Out of the subway they emerged into a noisy tenement street. Roger had known such streets as this, but only in the night time, as picturesque and adventurous ways in an underground world he had explored in search of strange, old, glittering rings. It was different now. Gone were the Rembrandt shadows, the leaping flare of torches, the dark surging masses of weird, uncouth humanity. Here, in garish daylight, were poverty and ugliness. Here were heaps of refuse and heavy smells and clamor. It disgusted and repelled him, and he was tempted to turn back. But glancing at Deborah by his side, he thought of the night she had been through. No, he decided he would go on and see what she was up to here. They turned into a narrower street between tall, dirty tenements, and in a twinkling all was changed. For the street, as far as he could see, was gay with flaunting colors. Torrents of bobbing hats and ribbons, frocks and blouses, shirts and breeches, vivid reds and yellows and blues. It was deafening with joyous cries, a shrill, incessant chatter, piercing yells and shrieks of laughter. Children, swarms of children of all sizes passed them, clean and dirty, smiling, scowling, hurrying, running, pummeling, grabbing, whirling each other round and round, till the very air seemed quivering with wild spirits and new life. He heard Deborah laughing. 5 hilarious small boys had hold of her hands and were marching in triumph, waving their caps. "Hey there, hey there, hey, hey, hey." The school was close in front of them, an enormous building of brick and tile wedged into a disordered mass of tenements, shops, and factories. It had been built around a court shut out from the street by a high steel fence. They squeezed into the gateway, through which a shouting, punching mob of urchins were now pushing in. And soon from a balcony above Roger looked down into the court, where out of a wild chaos order was appearing. Boys to the right and girls to the left were forming in long sinuous lines, and 3,000 faces were turned toward the building. In front appeared the Stars and Stripes. Then suddenly he heard a crash from underneath the balcony, and looking down he saw a band made up of some 30 or 40 boys. Their leader, a dark Italian lad, made a flourish, a pass with his baton, and the band broke into a blaring storm, an uproarious booming march. The mob below fell into step, and line after line in single file the children marched into their school. "Look up! Look all around you!" He heard Deborah's eager voice in his ear, and as he looked up from the court below he gave a low cry of amazement. In hundreds of windows all around, of sweatshops, tenements, factories, on tier upon tier of fire escapes, and even upon the roofs above, silent watchers had appeared. For this one moment in the day the whole congested neighborhood had stopped its feverish labor and became an amphitheater with all eyes upon the school. And the thought flashed into Roger's mind, Deborah's big family. He had a strange, confusing time. In her office, in a daze, he sat and heard his daughter, with her 2 assistant principals, her clerk, and her stenographer, plunge into the routine work of the day. What kind of school teacher was this? She seemed more like a manager of some buzzing factory. Messages kept coming constantly from classrooms. Children came for punishment, and on each small human problem she was passing judgment quickly. Meanwhile, a score of mothers, most of them Italians with colored shawls upon their heads, had straggled in and taken seats, and one by one they came to her desk. For these women, who had been children in peasant huts in Italy, now had children of their own in the great city of New York, and they found it very baffling. How to keep them in at night, how to make them go to the priest, how to feed and clothe them, how to live in these tenement homes in this wild din and chaos. They wanted help and they wanted advice. Deborah spoke in Italian, but turning to her father, she would translate from time to time. A tired, scowling woman said, "My boy won't obey me. His father is dead. When I slap him, he only jumps away. I lock him in, and he steals the key. He keeps it in his pocket. He steals the money that I earn. He says I'm from the country." And a flabby, anxious woman said, "My girl runs out to dance halls. Sometimes she comes back at 2 in the morning. She's 15 and she ought to get married, but what can I do? A nice steady man who never dances comes sometimes to see her, but she makes faces and calls him a fatty. She dances before him and pushes him out and slams the door. What can I do? Please come and see our janitor and make him fix our kitchen sink," an angry little woman cried. "When I try to wash the dishes, the water spouts all over me." And then a plump, rosy mother said in a soft, coaxing voice, "I have 8 little children, all nice and clean. When you tell them to do anything, they always do it quickly. They smile at you. They are like saints. So could the kind, beautiful teacher fix it up with a newspaper to send them to the country this summer when it's so hot? The newspaper could send a man and he could take our pictures." "Most of us girls used to be in this school," said a bright looking Jewess of 18, "and you taught us how we should live nice. But how can we live nice when our shop is so rotten? Our boss is trying to kiss the girls. He's trying to hug them on the stairs, and what he pays us is a joke, and we must work till 9 o'clock. So will you help us, teacher, and give us a room for our meetings here? We want to have a union." A truant officer brought in 2 ragged, frightened little chaps. Found on the street during school hours, they had to give an account of themselves. Sullenly, one of them gave an address far up in the Bronx, 10 miles away. They had not been home for a week, he said. Was he lying? What was to be done? Somewhere in the city their homes must be discovered, and the talk of the truant officer made Roger feel ramifications here, which wound out through the police and the courts to reformatories, distant cells. He thought of that electric chair, and suddenly he felt oppressed by the heavy complexity of it all. And this was part and parcel of his daughter's daily work in school. Still dazed, disturbed, but curious, he sat and watched and listened while the bewildering demands of Deborah's big family kept crowding in upon her. He went to a few of the classrooms and found that reading and writing, arithmetic and spelling were being taught in ways which he had never dreamed of. He found a kindergarten class, a carpenter shop, and a printing shop, a sewing class, and a cooking class in a large model kitchen. He watched the nurse in her hospital room. He went into the dental clinic where a squad of 50 urchins were having their teeth examined, and out upon a small side roof he found a score of small invalids in steamer chairs, all fast asleep. It was a strange, astounding school. He heard Deborah speak of a mothers' club and a neighborhood association, and he learned of other ventures here, the school doctor, the nurse, and the visitor endlessly making experiments, delving into the neighborhood for ways to meet its problems. And by the way Deborah talked to them, he felt she had gone before, that years ago by day and night she had been over the ground alone, and she'd done all this while she lived in his house. Scattered memories out of the past, mere fragments she had told him, here flashed back into his mind. Humorous little incidents of daily battles she had waged in rotten old tenement buildings, with rags and filth and garbage, with vermin, darkness, and disease. Mingled with these had been accounts of dances, weddings, and christenings, and of curious funeral rites. And struggling with such dim memories of Deborah in her 20s, Called forth in his mind by the picture of the woman of 30 here, Roger grew still more confused. What was to be the end of it? She was still but a pioneer in a jungle, endlessly groping and trying new things. How many children are there in the public schools? He asked. About 800,000, Deborah said. Good Lord, he groaned, and he felt within him a glow of indignation rise against these immigrant women for breeding so inconsiderately. With the mad city growing so fast and the people of the tenements breeding, and packing the schools to bursting, what could any teacher be but a mere cog in a machine, ponderous, impersonal, blind, grinding out future New Yorkers? He reached home limp and battered from the storm of new impressions coming on top of his sleepless night. He had thought of a school as a simple place, filled with little children, mischievous at times perhaps, and some with dirty faces, but still with minds and spirits clean, unsoiled as yet by contact with the grim spirit of the town. He had thought of childhood as something intimate and pure, inside his home, his family. Instead of that, in Deborah's school he had been disturbed and thrilled by the presence all around him of something wild, barbaric, dark, compounded of the city streets, of surging crowds, of rushing feet, of turmoil, filth, disease, and death, of poverty and vice and crime. But Roger could still hear that band, and behind its blaring crash and din he had felt the vital throbbing of a tremendous joyousness, of gaiety, fresh hopes and dreams, of leaping young emotions like deep buried bubbling springs, bursting up resistlessly to renew the fevered life of the town. Deborah's big family, everybody's children. You will live on in our children's lives. The vision hidden in those words now opened wide before his eyes.